Cheers to week 3, my first win. Anyway, how's it going, guys? Week 4 here. This is bye week start. Teams that are on bye are Green Bay and Philadelphia, as you guys probably already know. Hopefully, this Green Bay can take this week to figure out their system somehow, so that we can get back to our fantasy gold with Randall Cobb and Eddie Lacy, and even Aaron Rodgers. Hopefully, he can step it up a little bit. But yeah, as I did, hopefully you guys liked the first video on week 3. So I'm just gonna continue like I did on that one. On this one, I'm gonna tell you, some people to pick up as well. I guess I kind of did that last week as well, but yeah, I'm gonna just jump right into it. Some of the week 4 injuries here. Obviously, there are injuries. Russell Wilson is still banged up here. He came into the game banged up with his right ankle, and then left with a sprained left knee. It's a suspected sprained MCL. He played on it, which may have made it worse, but at this point, he's expected to play on it for this week. But worth monitoring throughout the week. He played. He actually hadn't missed a snap since he started playing until last week, where he sat out one game or one series or one play and was like, you know what, I gotta get back in. Ultimately, I think that may have hurt his or strained it a little bit more. But we'll see. Worth monitoring throughout the week. But I would consider trying to find a backup for Russell Wilson just in case he is not available to go. Next person is Jeremy Langford. He had a sprained right ankle. It's pretty bad. He's out for 4 to 6 weeks here. Kadeem Carey is also banged up. There, that's the backup to them, to Jeremy Langford in Chicago. And we'll see his progressions throughout the week. But expect Kadeem Carey to be out as well. The guy to pick up in Chicago is Jordan Howard. He got 92 all-purpose yards on 13 tries when Langford went out. I consider that a pretty good outing when you're just like, hey, thrown in there. So if you need a flex pickup for this week, consider him as they're going against a not so great Detroit defense. The position rankings actually just came out on ESPN today, and Matthew Berry and Field Yates actually have Howard within the RB2 area as well. So if you're really hurting for running back, Howard's someone to pick someone up, or Howard's one to pick up. So yeah, going on here, Shane Vereen has a torn tricep. I can't imagine that feels very good. Placed on the IR, expected to miss until at least week 11. They are hoping to trying to hold on to some hope that he'll come back. Rashad Jennings is still hurt. He will receive more work if Rashad Jennings does get healthy. I just got an update here saying that it's Rashad Jennings looks like a scratch for this week, and it's not like a return. However, it's not official. They're projecting that he's gonna not play this week because they're worried about ball security because it is his finger, it is around his hand area. So they don't want him to stress out. Obviously that affects his ball carrying. All that stuff. So regardless, stay away from the New York Giants backfield as they're playing the great Minnesota defense in week 4. So I would just stay away from the Giants backfield regardless of who's going to start, just because of the defense that they're playing. Moving on, Jared Cook. He has a bye this week, but he's got a right ankle injury. Expected to miss some time, but Green Bay is not sure whether it will be a week after the bye or just a week after that too. So it could be multiple weeks. It could be just a week after the bye. We're not 100% sure, but I don't think anybody's really starting Jared Cook at this point. Moving on, Dez Bryant. I actually just got an update from Adam Schefter, it looks like, or maybe Field Yates. It looked like his knee is a hairline fracture in his right knee. What that means is it's basically it didn't break the surface of the bone. So basically it was just right on the top of the bone. Still can't feel too good. But they're hoping that he'll play this week. If anything, probably just miss a week. So that's definitely something to monitor throughout this week. Bryant came back in the game after missing a few snaps, so I mean that bodes well. Hopefully that's just the same. Hopefully he's feeling the same way he does for this week as well. Moving on, Deshaun Jackson tweaks the same left ankle he did in the preseason. He returned in the third quarter of that game, so hopefully he didn't think it was too bad. But obviously injuries grow as they get some rest as well as some stress, as well as some usage. So monitor that as well. He is someone that I would be starting if I had him in a flex position, maybe a wide receiver too. But worth monitoring his hamstring or his left ankle. Sorry. Moving on, Willie Snead still has his tweak in his toe. They're thinking it was turf toe last week. Expected to come back this week. Regardless of what they say, Snead should still be monitored throughout this week. Washington's secondary. I usually don't do defense or anybody like that or any specific people on defenses. But their secondary just lost D'Angelo Hall, their safety, torn ACL. He's out for the season, and cornerback Brashad Breeland in his ankle. Their defense was their secondary was a defense that I was actually pretty high on, thinking that they could hold off the entire year as a secondary to be forced to be reckoned with. But now with these guys went down, granted they have Josh Norman, but they have some weakness on the secondary moving forward. With Norman guarding the prominent wide receiver on most fantasy teams, I mean this is my take on it. With Norman guarding the most prominent wide receivers on most teams, owners should possibly look for that big fantasy game with those wide receiver number twos on some offenses. That is if they've proven to be reliable wide receiver number one or reliable wide receivers. Like I'm thinking of off the top of my head, like Will Fuller or like Sterling Shepard or just people like that. Kevin White, just people wide receiver number twos that have been proven and could have some big fantasy days if Norman's guarding the bigger wide receiver. Another defensive person that got hurt again, it was J.J. Watt. Unfortunately, they took a hit this week. He hurt his back again, and he's out for the season. He's placed on the IR, and unfortunately, he is not going to be playing with the Texans the rest of the season, which is a big blow to the Texans' defense there. So if that was one of the big reasons why you had a Texans defense, I would consider finding someone else. But I own the Texans defense for one of my leagues, so I'm holding on to them this week, see what happens here. But other than that, we'll see how it goes. The reason I mention all these ankle injuries is because they aren't exactly injuries that should be taken lightly. I know they're like minor things that happened in the game and they came back. But like hamstring injuries, ankle injuries are, the smallest tweak could still bother them enough for them to keep them out of the game or to limit their production. We saw in Willie Snead, he said he was able to go. They thought he was going to be able to go, but it was a game time decision. Where they didn't want to stress it. They didn't want to play on it, so they didn't want to hurt it some more. So that held them out of the game. Meaning that even if these players are a go for game time, they might not be 100% unless otherwise. But then, it'd still be ailing them. They'd still feel it. So that's why I said that. Moving on, I guess, it's going on to who's hot and who's not. For QBs, for the hot QBs this week, or I guess as of late, Dak Prescott's been killing it. He still does not have an interception. Proceeds to knock on wood. I am starting to think that the Cowboys may have found their new look that they were searching for. They got Dak Prescott, they got Ezekiel Elliott, two rookies that have really proven themselves. And I mean, Prescott has continued to improve in fantasy each week as well, with 22 fantasy points. He goes up against the moderately tough San Francisco run defense, so that may limit how he plays and how Elliott's ability to run the ball, and how they take off pressure from Dak Prescott as well. But I'm still confident Dak can toss his way out of this one. He's a start if you got Rodgers on bye, and if you don't have a confident backup QB. But obviously, if you have someone else. If you have another reliable quarterback, like, you got Andrew Luck or you got Phillip Rivers, even though, both of them have had their bad weeks, he's still a good quarterback. You might want to might consider hey, maybe this guy. Anyway, next person, Matt Stafford. I know I talked shit about him last week, but I think that throughout the QBs that I could have picked from, he was hot. I mean, week 3 was not kind to a whole lot of QBs, but Stafford shined. Now with a confident wide receiver in Marvin Jones, I think Stafford has a chance to continue to produce as Detroit plays with a shoddy Chicago defense, as just giving up 22 fantasy points to the aforementioned Dak Prescott. I mean, Stafford has a chance now to continue to produce what what we think Stafford can produce. And now that he has found a wide receiver like Marvin Jones, he lost Megatron, so now he has another confident wide receiver. I think he's confident in throwing to him. And people like Golden Tate and Eric Ebron are people to, get off to, take the coverage away from Marvin Jones as well. I'm not saying Marvin Jones is wide receiver number 1 in Detroit, but he's definitely up there. Someone on the watch list this week is Kirk Cousins. Here's another QB that I ripped on last week, but with a favorable matchup against Cleveland, who have led up 300 passing yards and 5 touchdowns in the past 2 weeks. The rise of Kirk Cousins is coming. Granted, a good chunk of his fantasy points came to the bomb downfield to Deshaun Jackson last week, but he has shown us now that he is on the rise. If Deshaun plays, I'd consider starting Cousins. But if Jackson does not play, I would try and look for a better option. Kirk Cousins is teetering on that fantasy boom or bust fence that just aggravates all fantasy owners. So, he's someone to keep on your bench, to look out for, to see if, hey, should I start Kirk Cousins? Is he going to do well this week? If he does well, then maybe I can start him next week if he has a favorable matchup. He's one of those quarterbacks to kind of look out for. On the not column, Andrew Luck is not hot with a fumble and an interception on 2 touchdowns in the past 2 games. With a fumble and an interception and only 2 touchdowns in the past 2 games. Fantasy owners, like myself, are starting to doubt Andrew Luck. That's a touchdown for every 2 turnovers. I mean, that's not something that you want. And that's not something that owners are willing to roll the dice with. I mean, he's only gotten owners 22 fantasy points out of the last 2 weeks. Dak Prescott got that last week. Right now, he's not hot. But Indianapolis does play Jacksonville, who let up 4 touchdowns to a muddied and clouded San Diego wide receiver core, much like Indianapolis, I guess, 2 weeks ago. So, I mean, the potential is there for Andrew Luck to do really well. But he's still in that slump, so I think he's still coming off that injury as well. So I think that's something that you should monitor. If you have someone better, like Stafford, start him over Andrew Luck. But Andrew Luck is someone that is still in that slump. My assumption is that if you have Andrew Luck, you drafted him high, so you don't really have. I'm assuming you have a backup quarterback that isn't the best. So, yeah. Moving on, Eli Manning does not have a good matchup this week. He's someone who's also not hot. With the wonderful Odell Beckham Jr., Sterling Shepard, and Victor Cruz, you'd think Eli Manning would be producing the same wonderful numbers as they are, but he isn't. The past 2 weeks, he has not broken the 15-point barrier. That's not what you want for your quarterback. He also has a bad ratio of 1 touchdown for every 1 turnover. Going up against the Minnesota defense, I would stray away from starting Eli this week. Sorry about that. I got a text message, but whatever. I don't know. He's just one of those quarterbacks that you'd be like, okay, so his offense is doing really well. His passing, his wide receivers are doing well. You'd think that he would be doing really well too. But I guess that's not the case. Two quarterbacks to kind of beware of is Ben Roethlisberger is one of them. Throughout the first 2 weeks, Big Ben is a confident start, but as soon as he went up against a tough Philadelphia defense, he showed his true colors. He couldn't get a tight end to save his life. He has 5 turnovers in 3 games, 4 of which have been interceptions. He goes up against the Kansas City defense, who, how can I say this without making Marcus cry? I think this works, right? Just picked apart and took a nasty shit on the Jets last week, making Ryan Fitzpatrick look like a fool. The Kansas City defense had 6 interceptions off the QB, and Big Ben throwing an interception in each game. There's cause for some concern there. I just think I think you need to beware of Ben Roethlisberger. The next guy is Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan was by far the QB I was most high on last week, but this week and a couple weeks to come, he not so much. If you take a look at the Atlanta schedule, they play Carolina this week, who are pissed off about their loss, rightfully so, from the Minnesota defense. Denver next week, and Seattle the week after. That's 3 bad weeks right in a row. In Week 10, the week before their bye, they play Philadelphia defense. And after their bye, they play Arizona, and then Kansas City again. And then Kansas City. And not to add insult to injury, they play Carolina again in Week 16. I know. I said fantasy is week-to-week game, but that is 7 out of the 13 games of the season that are left. And you want to play week to week, but this is an example of where you need to look in the long run so you're not blindsided. Insert Michael or joke here. Wait, that didn't land. Okay, moving on. Running backs. The hot running backs this week, or I guess the hot running backs that I chose, are Melvin Gordon. I mean, got to give Gordon some love again. He's while he did not get a whole lot of yards on his carries, he still managed to find the end zone, which is nice. He also was involved in the passing game, hauling in 43 yards on 4 receptions. That's a quick and easy 8 points right there. He has now shown that he can not only run the ball like 2 weeks ago, he can also catch the ball. I believe he's versatile. With the San Diego team traveling to New Orleans against a terrible defense in general, giving up 115 fantasy points to opposing running backs, 60 of which came from the Atlanta backfield last week. I believe that he'll have another great week. I'm high on Melvin Gordon. The next running back that's hot, Christian Michael. It looks like Thomas Rawls' injury is more intense than we thought. They're saying it's something to do with his fibula, which means Michael is getting the start again. Additionally, his backup is also tweaked, which means he is the only back in Seattle that they trust. He showed that he is able to produce against a strong run defense in San Francisco, racking up 24 points off of his 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. He travels to MetLife this week, where he faces another strong run defense, only giving up 53 fantasy points through 3 games to running backs, which isn't that great. I mean, if you average that out, that's only about 15-ish, 15, 20 points per running back. I don't know. It's not that good. It's a tough must start, but regardless, if this will prove whether or not he can continue hit this production. I mean, if you have Christian Michael, he's a great start this week for flex for sure, and maybe a low end running back too. Another player that I mentioned last week is LeGarrette Blount. He's still hot. I think Blount has another game like last week. He is the main running back in New England, and he has with the ailing QBs, it's tough to be sold on Blount. I mean, look at LA with shitty quarterbacks. Gurley it's tough for Gurley to get off the ball. So as of me writing this on Tuesday, Garoppolo and Brissett both saw practice today, but neither participating in QB drills. I just got a Twitter notification this morning showing that Garoppolo was throwing some balls, so that's nice to see. Take this as you will, but I think one of them is bound to be good to go for this week, and I think it will be Garoppolo. Giving Blount the ability to produce against a run defense who has given up 190 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 56 fantasy points in the past 2 games. That's pretty good. That's a shitty defense, but that's good for running backs going against him. Granted, the 2 running backs were David Johnson and Matt Forte's unreal Thursday night game, but still, I think Blount has another week in him before Brady takes over, and the New England offense goes back to passing the ball. On the watch list this week, Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman, the lovely running back by committee. I stand by my claim last week that Coleman will take over the starting job in Atlanta. More now than ever, actually. If you watch Monday Night Game, you saw that Atlanta trusted Coleman to get in there with a score and a touchdown. 3 of them to be exact. However, Freeman did see how. Okay, sorry. Okay. They played against the Saints defense, but still, not only did Coleman look good, Freeman also looked really good. He broke a 60-some yard run toward the end of the game, and it's hard to choose a running back and a running back by committee. But if I had to do it, I would be Coleman. As for this week, though, they play Carolina. It's a tough sell to start each of these running backs. But with all the injuries, you almost have to. I mean, if you have them, it's a tough start against Carolina's defense, as they have led up about 18 fantasy points in the past 2 games, amounting to 115 yards and 55 attempts. So, I mean, it's a tough start to start either one of these guys because you don't know which one's going to go off. My take, I guess, is that Coleman is trusted in the red zone to, get getting into the end zone. However, Freeman showed that he is Freeman from the last from the previous season. He looked really good. He was making cuts. He was running the ball really nicely. So it's really tough to try and start either one of these guys. But like I said, with all the injuries to the running back, it's tough to not start one of them. The other guy on the watch list here, the reason I put Le'Veon Bell on the watch list is purely because he needs to prove himself that he is Le'Veon Bell still. Obviously, we all have high hopes, and we all think it's going to be Le'Veon Bell again. But still, we want to see him actually be Le'Veon Bell before we put all our stock in him. At least I do. Granted, if you're holding on to Le'Veon Bell these past 3 weeks, you're going to be starting him because you're waiting for this moment. But I physically want to watch Le'Veon Bell run the ball and see how he does. I just want to watch him and see how he runs the ball. So yeah, that's why I have him on the watch list. Instead of start. Obviously, if you have him, you're starting him. But keep an eye on him because you don't want to be stuck with Le'Veon Bell sucking and then not doing really well. It's kind of like the Eddie. I guess it wasn't. No, I'm forget about that. Moving on, the not list. For the not list, the first guy on there is Spencer Ware. I have him, and unfortunately, I might have to start him this week. But regardless, he's not that hot. That first week was such a tease. It's just like that. Okay, I'm gonna explain how Spencer Ware fantasy owners feel, and personally, this is how I feel because I have him in our league. It's just like that super hot girl that you finally were able to fuck, and then you find out that she has a giant bush and sucks at BJ's. And to make things worse, her hotter and more talented best friend just broke up with her boyfriend and then is down to get with you. So basically, you're stuck with Ware when you want Charles. And maybe that's how I feel about the Kansas City backfield right now, and that's how all the owners feel like with Spencer Ware and not Jamal Charles, because Jamal Charles is going to come back. This week it looks like he's not going to. They are not 100% sure what the workload is going to be like, but regardless, he's going to come back eventually, and you're stuck with Spencer Ware, and you're stuck with jack shit unless Jamal Charles ends up hurting himself again or gets hurt. But the last thing we want to do is root for an injury. Anyway, I've ranted enough about Spencer Ware. Moving on to the next guy who's not exactly hot. Besides his one game, I mentioned this previously on Thursday night, Forte hasn't been doing very well. Forte sucked against the great Kansas City defense, and now he plays the Arizona defense this week. I would be wary of the Forte this week. Granted, they just gave up 27 points to the San Francisco backfield, but still, it's a scary play. We know Arizona's defense is a good defense. But I'm assuming if you own Forte, you're starting him because he is one of those running backs that, unfortunately you have to start him regardless if you have him. I know you have, we always have those players on the start him, sit him, or the love hate, or whatever you guys use to figure out who you want to start this week. We always have those players that get on the not column, and you're like, well, I gotta start him. I don't have anybody else. Unfortunately, I think Matt Forte is one of those players. I hate saying this because I play Logan this week, and Logan has Matt Forte, and right now he has him on his bench, so fingers crossed. Anyway, moving on to the Beware column. I put Lamar Miller on the Beware column because he has not really he hasn't got a touchdown yet. So free Lamar Miller was a frequent chant around the Fantasy Football Focus podcast. I've been listening to that recently. There was a glimmer of hope through these first couple of weeks with the amount of carries and touches he was getting. He's getting amount like 20 touches and 20 carries a game, which is unbelievable compared to what he had in Miami. But sadly, throughout all 84 all-purpose touches, 74 of those being runs, Miller has failed to see the end zone. And this to make things worse, Houston plays a difficult Tennessee run defense, was only let up one touchdown to running backs this year. I think Lamar Miller is a must start, but worthy to start thinking about trading if you don't have enough people, or if you don't think that he's going to do really well. If you're not totally sold on him, I'd consider trading him if you need to. At this point, it's getting to that point. Going on, there's going to be a loud noises soon because my mom just came home. So bear with me here. I'm going to continue. Hopefully I don't have to pause this or anything like that. But anyway, wide receivers that are hot. Jarvis Landry. Here's a guy that has been quiet around the fantasy talks as of late. In the past 2 games, he's managed to haul in 255 yards and 17 receptions with 1 touchdown. That's the past 2 games. He's gotten that. Even without that touchdown in week 3, Landry would have gotten you 20 points. And that's fine by me. The way he was drafted and where he was drafted, people were expecting to put him at his flex position, maybe low-end wide receiver number 2. And now he's getting 20 points, where that's right around the area you want to get your wide receiver number 1 points. So it was someone who has owned Landry in the years past. I can tell you that he is consistent. He's a consistent fellow. I mean, he'll give you an upper teen fantasy day each week almost, and he plays the Bengals in a primetime game this Thursday, who just allowed 3 touchdowns to Trevor in Denver. So look to start him in PPR formats, and really any formats, to be honest. A few next wide receiver, Marvin Jones. All right, don't start saying I'm jumping on the hype train, because I'm not. Okay, maybe I am a little bit. Regardless, I love Marvin Jones in Cincinnati. In Cincinnati, granted, he didn't do a whole lot when he was shadowed by arguably one of the NFL's top wide receivers, but still, he has had some massive games there, but then he would drop off. I don't think that's the case here in Detroit. Stafford has been trying to find that wide receiver to replace his buddy Megatron, but I think he may have found some confidence in Marvin Jones, like I was saying before. Even before this week that he had last week, Jones managed to catch over 200 yards and have over 30 fantasy points out of 2 weeks. I'd say that's the reason to start him this week against Chicago defense. I mean, by the way, don't be scared about Chicago's defensive numbers. The QBs that played haven't been elite yet. You know, they've played Osweiler, Wentz, and Prescott. So if you're looking at the defense and they say, oh, they're playing a really good defense, don't be scared by that, because they haven't played that very good quarterbacks. So this week, Stafford gets to really shine on the light on the Chicago defense, and hopefully Marvin Jones will get most of the catches as well. Next person on the hot list didn't do very hot last week. However, I think that he just had a bad week, and he's just coming. I mean, I put him on the not list last week, but I think he'll come back this week. He had a bad week, but we all saw this coming. He had a rookie QB that ran a whole lot of options and a bunch of college plays. But this week, hopefully he'll get Garoppolo back, which I think he will, and in turn will get some points and get some more targets. The matchup is favorable for him, playing Buffalo, the worst team in fantasy against wide receivers. And with a long week for Garoppolo to heal, I think he'll come out guns blazing. However, if Garoppolo isn't ready to go, which I think he will be, I would take a look to see if you have any other matchups besides Edelman. Side note, take a look at his next couple of weeks. He plays Cleveland, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Buffalo again, all of which that have not the greatest secondaries, and not to mention they get Tom Brady back. Either wait and sell high after this week's game, or quickly buy low on him off of his production last week. Or you can just keep him if you think he's going to do really well. Doesn't matter to me. That's what I think. Moving on, some person on the watch list here, Terrell Pryor. I'm sure you guys saw my post this week. Pryor came out of the game with 31 fantasy points. The only 2 wide receivers to do better, Emmanuel Sanders and Marvin Jones. If you said I would be giving you those stats this week when we drafted, I would flip the table. Cleveland has been looking for a playmaker, and they may have found it in Pryor. He's had 8 receptions, 144. He had 8 receptions, 144 yards, 4 touchdowns and 21 yards, and a touchdown. Or 4 touches, and 21 yards and a touchdown, and then threw for 35 yards. I'm not saying he's a must start at this point, but he's a must add. Keep it on your bench. If you need a flex play, throw him in there. But keep an eye on him until he proves that this is for real. I mean, last week sure showed that he's the real deal for something. I mean, he's going to play some at some amount for these weeks. So I mean, definitely add him onto your team. Another person on my watch list is Mike Evans. I mean, he's another quiet guy that hasn't really been on my radar. He's been sneaking past my radar. He's gotten a touchdown in each of his games. He's produced around 20 fantasy points in each of them, and he's had 10 targets last week, which is hard to come by. I mean, so I would suggest you start this guy. Despite the tough matchup against the Denver defense, he also plays Carolina defense this week after these next 2 weeks before his bye. So there's really going to be a test of how really good he is. So keep an eye on Mike Evans. Moving on to the knot here. Brandon Marshall's on my first person on the knot. Marshall is still a little banged up, and maybe his fantasy points last week were due to this. But he's only had one game where he's gotten 40-plus yards. One game where he's gotten 40-plus yards, and that was a week against the easy Buffalo secondary. Last week he played the Kansas City secondary, in which the Jets got pounded. Sorry, Marcus. And then now he goes up against Seattle defense, who is first in wide receivers in fantasy. So if you look at the Seattle defense, has played and the teams that they played against, it's Miami, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. Not the greatest wide receiver heavy offenses, but you can see. So obviously you can see it's not that much of a competition. But this would be a week where Marshall This could be a week where Marshall turns around, but I wouldn't expect the world. Unfortunately, you're starting him if you got him this week, because I'm assuming you can't afford to bench Brandon Marshall. But regardless, he is someone who's kind of in that slump right now, or hasn't really been a consistent fantasy producer this season. Next person here is Amari Cooper. Cooper is another guy that can hopefully get out of his slump. This week he's been plummeting since his first great game. Despite that, looks like he's got a 54% catch rate with Carr this year, and is starting to show in fantasy. These next 2 weeks, however, he's got a chance to come back. But a receiver with a 54% catch rate is worth noting. Few players on the beware list here. Julio Jones is the first guy on my beware list. He is an elite wide receiver. He's definitely a start guy. You always are starting him. But all Julio Jones owners are playing to the almighty Jesus that Monday night's game was just a fluke, and not something that's going to be consistent. I will give him the benefit of the doubt, though. He was getting pushed around in the game when I was watching it, and he only came up with one pass interference call. The reason this elite wide receiver is in this part is because of his schedule in the next couple of weeks. Like I was saying for Matt Ryan, he plays Carolina, Denver, Seattle, and you're obviously starting Julio against all of those defenses. But again, you got to pray to baby Lord Jesus that that last week wasn't the start to a hair ripping slump. So he's definitely a guy you got to look out for. I'd say try and trade him right now. But if you can't, if there's no one else looking for him, then he's someone that you can always count on Julio Jones to be a wide receiver that you're going to be starting. You almost have to start him unless he's getting consistent 2 or 3 points for the next 3 weeks. Next guy is Alshon Jeffrey. All right, so Jeffrey has been consistently putting up 14-ish fantasy points, which isn't the worst, but the way he was being drafted, I was hoping for a little bit more. He goes out there against a vulnerable Detroit secondary this week, and his week couple of games are nice matchups. I don't know what I was saying like that. Just keep an eye on this injury-prone wide receiver because he has been, as of late, hasn't produced a wide receiver number 1 value. So just keep an eye on him. A couple guys. Moving on to tight ends here. A couple of guys I'm going to zip through this again like I did last week. Some guys that could be hot. Gronk's back. Granted, he didn't get a catch or anything last week, but he's back. I think he'll be more involved in the offense this week because last week they had so little time to coordinate him into the offense. I think this week they have a full week and almost a week and a half to try and figure out something with Gronk and Garoppolo. Kyle Rudolph. Totally called this one, so keep him up. Keep up Kyle Rudolph on the top of your list, and Colby Fleener. I wonder if he's for real, but we saw how Jimmy Graham did. But I'm not comparing him to Jimmy Graham back then, but we saw how he did in the Saints, and how Drew Brees loves his tight ends. Picture Benjamin Watson at back last year. Not so great tight ends here. Jason Witten, he's just not getting the looks like he did the first week. Keep an eye on him. I'm always high on Dak Prescott and his check down ability, like every rookie quarterback. Some other guys, Dwayne Allen. Andrew Luck is struggling. So is Dwayne Allen. Same guy. Hasn't been doing good since week 1. And then Julius Thomas. He's another guy that I'm not so great on. Watch list. Zach Miller. He's one guy who finally showed what he can do. Hopefully that can continue with Brian Hoyer with a new quarterback there. And Hunter Henry. Antonio Gates is back up here. A lot of people like him, and if you're looking for a tight end to start this week, I wouldn't mind picking him up and starting him. Yeah, especially if you have Antonio Gates as your main tight end. Moving on here, going into the matchups now. All right, I'm trying to zip through this here. First matchup, like I said before, I'm going against Logan, so it's me and Logan here. Looking at the matchups here, I think I got him in quarterback with Stafford versus Roethlisberger this week. Fingers crossed on Roethlisberger getting like 20 million interceptions. But I think he's got me on running backs for sure. DeMarco Murray and David Johnson, those are the number one and number two running backs in this season. Emmanuel Sanders, that was another guy I was hot on. He was going to make it in the column, but I didn't put him on. I didn't want to put 4 in the hot column. But I think Emmanuel Sanders, he just got signed to a 3 or 4 year, 5-year contract, and I think he's going to produce again. They really have some confidence in Trevor. But I got Antonio Brown. Hopefully Ben Roethlisberger throws something to him. But if he does throw a touchdown to him, I'm getting most of the points, more points than he is from the touchdowns. I got him on Greg Olsen versus Witten, and I don't know. It'll be a tough game. Unfortunately, it projects us. Not unfortunately. Fortunately, it projects me to win. Projections on the NFL.com site are whack. So hopefully, again, I got to root for myself as a win, but it's going to be a tough win for me. It's going to be a tough battle. Next matchup here is Connor versus Steven. Steven gets Le'Veon Bell back, and Todd Gurley finally did something. So it might be time for Steven's team to turn around. He also has Marvin Jones. Logan sure felt that last week. Unfortunately, Logan lost to him last week because of Marvin Jones, which is really unfortunate. But anyway, Connor had a tough week with Cam Newton and Kelvin Benjamin not getting a whole lot of points. But I do think that and even Julio Jones too, he did nothing. So hopefully his team can produce this week. However, I do think Steven might have him this week. Considering, Steven could almost consider throwing Snead in there if he's healthy, or Brandon Marshall. He's got an okay team. They're just banged up at the moment. So my pick is Steven, even though they have Connor winning here. Going on to the next game, Mark and Marcus here. Looks like they both have buys that they got to switch people out on. Looks like Marcus doesn't have a QB to pick up. So maybe trade bait there. Maybe you want Kirk Cousins. Maybe, I don't know. Regardless, it looks like there's plenty of quarterbacks to go out and pick up. But it also looks like Mark has Eddie Lacy out, which might be tough for him because it doesn't really look like he has any running backs that he can replace him with. But he does have Jarvis Landry, Brandon Cooks, Kyle Rudolph, Odell Beckham Jr., but he also does have Eli Manning and Odell Beckham, and he's starting Giovanni Bernard. That's his number one running back right now, and that's not exactly the best thing in the world. It's going to be, I think, I'm gonna call this the trash game this week. I think Marcus comes out with the win, but I think that's going to be the game that no one wants to watch. Going on to the next game, Nathan versus Grant. Fortunately, Grant is 3-0. Oh my gosh. I think hell is frozen over and pigs are starting to fly because I never thought that would come out of my mouth. Looks like Nathan's got Russell Wilson and Kristen Michael and Jeremy Langford. You might want to switch Jeremy Langford in there. Got Chris Ivory, Forsett, Crowell. Ooh, I'd start Crowell, but I don't know. That's just me. But anyway, looking at the matchups just real quick here, it looks like Grant has another win with a 4-0. Sorry, Nate. And sorry for the rest of the league to even say that. 4-0, that's not fun. Next game here, Sam and Matt. Looking at here, looks like Sam's got Devontae Freeman in, which is a good start. Diggs, there we go. Mike Evans, Carson Palmer. Carson Palmer really costed a whole lot of fantasy owners headaches last week. But Matt still got D'Angelo Williams in. Doesn't really look like he has a whole lot of running backs. He got Carlos Hyde, I guess. And then Jordan Matthews is on a bye for Matt as well. So he can throw someone in there for that. This game is going to be another close one, I think. But I think Sam's going to come out with the win this week as Carson Palmer plays LA. And Diggs is on a Monday night game, and we saw how well Diggs played in prime time last time. So I'm going to say Sam wins this one again. All right, so that's about it. That's all I got. Hopefully I get a win this week. I wanna go 500, but we'll see what happens. Let me know how I'm doing here. If you guys want me to add anything, if you guys want me to take anything out, if anything's helpful, if anything's not helpful, if you think of anything, just let me know. Shoot me a message, shoot me a text or anything. If I'm doing really great, then let me know. But, who knows. But regardless, cheers, boys.